I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Amon and Danny, and everyone who came here tonight. So the war on the Eastern Front was characterized by extreme violence, which also targeted civilians. Lithuania was one of the first geographical areas to be occupied by the Nazis during Operation Barbarossa, and where they immediately started a systematic annihilation of the Jewish population. This first phase of the war is known as Holocaust by bullets. Jews were murdered by gunfire and buried in mass graves. In 1942, after the massive violent actions against the Jewish population that were part of the German invasion plans, Jews started to break out of the Lithuanian and Belarusian ghettos and camps and attempted to escape to forests nearby, particularly following violent operations such as German raids, roundups, deportations, and massacres. Above all, their fleeing was a means of survival. No less important, they also aimed to fight back and take revenge on the Germans and their collaborators through engaging in partisan combat after learning of the Soviet partisan activity. This type of partisan fighting was conducted by individuals and groups who found themselves in the position of guerrilla fighters, most without any prior training or military background. Those Jews had to learn to be skilled guerrilla fighters and quickly engage in this unique type of warfare. The forest became a theater of war for those Jewish partisans, men and women, and they had to deal with a new and unfamiliar savage physical environment. Guerrilla fighting has performed a long-standing and significant role in military history. It is not an organized military force that can lead to complete victory. Rather, its goal is to weaken the enemy by unpredictable harassments. Guerrilla warriors must conduct countless repetitions of small, focused actions, assassinations, acts of sabotage, and ambushes. Topographically, the partisan warfare is conducted in locations that are difficult for the regular army to infiltrate, such as high mountains and thick forests. During the Second World War, partisan warfare took place in various Nazi-occupied territories, such as parts of the Soviet Union, Belarus, Lithuania, Ukraine, etc., the general government in Poland, and Slovakia, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Greece, and Albania. Following the German invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, a sizable partisan movement was created. The leadership of the Soviet Union was surprised and caught unprepared for the intensity of the German invasion. The Red Army waged survival combat against the Wehrmacht in the first months following the invasion, and Soviet soldiers withdrew into forested and swamped areas beyond enemy lines. In the summer of 1941, the first signs of partisan warfare appeared on the Russian front as spontaneous actions by the junior ranks of the Communist Party and the Red Army, who had remained behind enemy lines. In most cases, they lacked any organizational structure and acted without clear military goals. They also lacked supplies and ammunition and had no experience nor knowledge in guerrilla warfare. Many of those unorganized soldiers retreated to the forested areas, wandering in small groups that became known as the wild groups. The role of the partisan units was both military and political. To help the Red Army fight off the German invaders, by creating impossible conditions for them to operate and promote anti-Nazi propaganda among the local population. Many of the locals held anti-Soviet worldviews, and the task was to prepare them for the onset of Soviet domination after the war. Following a meeting of the German High Command on July 16, 1941, Adolf Hitler declared that, I quote, "The Russians have now ordered partisan warfare behind our front. This partisan warfare has some advantages for us. It enables us to wipe out everyone who opposes us." The main method employed by the Germans against the partisans was to invade the forest en masse, to hunt them down and destroy their bases. This type of action was called by the partisans oblava, manhunt. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels wrote in his diary on March 6, 1942, "An SD report informed me about the situation in occupied Russia. It is, after all, more unstable than was generally assumed. The partisan danger is increasing week by week. The partisans are in command of large areas in occupied Russia and are conducting a regime of terror there." Going back to the Jewish perspective, the Jews were not readily being accepted into partisan units if they didn't possess a weapon. They were absorbed in mixed partisan units, Jews and non-Jewish fighting together, or separate Jewish units. In most cases, those who possessed weapons joined an already existing Soviet partisan unit. However, in rare instances, Jews managed to establish all Jewish units for themselves. After arriving at the forests, Jews wandered in small groups and had to defend themselves, not only from the Germans and their collaborators, but also from the local population. Most of the locals in the places we are referring to held anti-Semitic views and did not hesitate to inform on Jews and hand them over to the Germans. Yet the survival of the Jews in the forests depended on the locals' assistance. The partisans depended on the locals for food, clothes, medical supplies, horses, wagons, etc. Jews were also organized in partisan family camps. In those camps, a small number of fighters defended the defenseless camp population with what few weapons they had. Their job was to secure the camp and obtain food. The Bielsky brothers' camp in the Naliboki forest in Belarus, under the command of Tuvia Bielsky, whom you can see here, which at its peak housed 1,230 people, is probably the most well-known. Jews who made their way to the forests and joined fighting partisans participated in combat operations. Some of them, particularly those who had served in the Polish or Lithuanian armies before the war, had some knowledge or experience of military actions, but most had to learn combat skills from the beginning and required basic training in the use of weapons and explosives. The extent of the Jews' participation in combat actions depended on the goodwill and decision of the partisan commanders to include them in such operations. At times, the anti-Semitic tendencies of Soviet commanders and disrespect of the Jewish military and combat skills caused them to disregard the Jews and send them to non-fighting units, where their chances of survival were smaller. Some Jews with professional skills, such as medical doctors and nurses, map draftsmen and translators, earned a status of providing significant assistance to military operations. However, Jews faced anti-Semitism from the very first moment they arrived at the forests. The harassment by the non-Jewish partisans also included moral harm to the Jews. For example, non-Jewish partisans would say things such as, Jews are cowards, they ran away from danger, and why did you sit and wait in the ghetto until now? Why you gave all your money to the Germans and you came here to save yourselves? And I'm quoting from testimonies of former partisans. The Jews constantly felt that they had to justify themselves. I want to show you two documents which are connected to the topic of Jewish partisan warfare. The first one is a combat notebook, handwritten in Russian, which contains a chronological list of combat actions performed by a Jewish partisan battalion in the Lithuanian Rudniki forest. It lists the dates and details of actions, such as the number of combatants and names of the commanders. Another interesting document is a guidebook to partisan warfare, which was published in Moscow in 1940, translated to Russian from its original Finnish language, and was used during the war by Jews who had no previous military knowledge and had to learn to be partisans. Let me just quote one paragraph from these partisan guidelines. The ammunition of the partisan crew should contain hand grenades, explosives, and fuel. It is recommended to get a hold of anti-tank mines. If possible, the equipment must be light, but still provides the unit's needs in case of an overnight stay at a certain point. In the private possession of a partisan, there will be an axe and a knife. For communication, there should be a mobile two-way radio, signaling flashlight, and pigeons. Each fighter must possess medicine and bandages. Terrorizing the enemy is a common part of guerrilla warfare. In addition, terror is used as a form of punishment, both for individuals and collective. The partisans fought not only the Germans, as I told you, but also those who collaborated with them. At times, they would capture individual collaborators and execute them as a warning to others. But there were also times when there was no alternative but to collectively punish groups and even whole villages, which supported the Nazis. For the Jewish partisans, such punitive actions also served as revenge for the murder of their relatives. Such act of vengeance occurred on the night of January 29, 1944, in the village of Koniukai, located 20 kilometers north of Lida. It had a population of 300 villagers and was notorious for its cooperation with the Germans in their pursuit of the partisans. Village residents would attack partisans and torture to death those whom they captured alive. Approximately 150 partisans participated in the Koniuchi revenge action, among them about 30 Jews. According to testimony of the Jewish partisan Paul Bagriansky, the partisans learned that, I quote, "Our goal was to destroy the village as well as killing its residents. When I asked why should we take such a cruel and inhuman action, I was told that was a headquarters decision. We cannot allow armed villagers to compromise our partisan activity. It will also teach other villages to think twice before collaborating with the Nazis. The partisans were ordered to kill every man, woman, and child, including all animals, and destroy all property. Bagriansky continues, at midnight, the village was in flames. The horses and cows in their stables and barns made a terrible noise. Some of the horses managed to escape and ran in a frenzy from the burning village. The sounds of explosions caused by the thousands of German bullets that were kept in the villagers' homes, the cries of the burning animals, and the sound of villagers who were shot trying to escape, it was a living hell. When I visited Lithuania a few years back for a conference, I especially took a guide to visit Koniuchi because it was very important to me to be in the place where this massacre happened, and so I was able to take those photographs. In their testimonies, Jewish partisans recalled the different mentality among the Soviets and the Jews and point out to the Russians' roughness. The Jews also faced the Russians drinking on a daily basis. The Soviet partisans would often say that without half a liter, it won't go. Alcohol hindered the combatants' discipline and endangered operations, but on the other hand, it eased their sufferings. Hence, drinking became an inseparable part of life in the forest. As in any military organization, partisans who broke the rules were punished. A death sentence was one possible punishment. For example, losing a weapon was punishable by death, as was falling asleep during guard duty. I just wanted to say that I wrote an article about executions of Jewish partisans, so I can't expand on it now, but I can send it to you. On a personal note, the story of the Jewish partisans in those areas is also my own family history. Both my grandparents were partisans in the same forest, met in the improvised partisan kitchen, and participated together in partisan operations. My grandfather also lost his right hand in an action of blowing up a German ammunition train. To sum up, being both persecuted Jews and military fighters, the Jewish partisans had developed a double identity. They rejected their identification with Jewish victimhood, yet knew that they are exposed to persecution even in the forest because of their religion and race. They took upon themselves an alternative, unexpected military persona. Through the sources I've analyzed in my research, a complex and ambiguous picture of Jewish partisans' experience in the forests emerges. It is striking that the same events were experienced and remembered differently by witnesses, choosing to recount them in various versions. Some partisans look back on the forest period with nostalgia and yearning, recalling the wonderful feeling of freedom. Others state that living in the forest was the worst time of their life, a time of horrifying fear and existential anxiety. Nonetheless, by being part of a partisan unit, Jews increased the probability of their survival. Furthermore, they were able to actively resist the Nazis, contribute, albeit modestly, to the war against them, and take revenge for their murdered relatives and communities. And indeed, revenge was highly desirable during these days. Thank you so much.